now and then I really love to do a bit of collage, and you know how I've been trying to use up all of my patterned paper recently. Well, today I thought I would go for an all-out collage. And so here is Tex. Say hi to Tex, everyone. He's one of my cacti, and I'm using him as a model today for a piece that I'm going to do with just all pattern paper. So I've just started off by sketching him out on some paper just to kind of get the size that I want him to be at. It's just a very rough sketch. So my original thought with this was just to paper piece the whole picture, and I was actually only going to do the cactus and his pot. But in the end I decided that I'd put in a background as well. So my next job is to pick out some papers, which is the fun bit, isn't it? Going through your old stash of papers and picking out some lovely colours and stuff. So it's a complete mix and match from different pattern papers, and I won't be listing everything I've used here because they're all a bit out of date. You probably won't be able to get them anyway, but it just kind of gives you an idea of how to use the pattern papers that you've already got in your stash. But I will list out everything else that I've used, so you'll find that as usual in the description below. So for text, I thought I would go with some lovely bright greens and very warm greens, so I'm just picking those out. And also for his pot, I thought I'd go with sort of oranges and terracotta colours. Maybe a little bit of pink could sneak in there too, but we'll see as we progress. Now for the background, I thought I would go more pastel-y, so a pastel pink for the table, and sort of a pastel teal for the sky or the wall. Let's call it a wall, because I kind of imagine him sitting in his pot in a house, so perhaps on a table or something like that. So once I have all the colours together that I want to use, all my pieces of paper all stacked up by colour, I then decide that where he is on the page isn't quite where I want him for the finished project. So I'm now just going to copy him on to some tracing paper. So if you watched my whale from a couple of weeks ago, I actually did him on layout paper because I wanted to make a mask from him. But this time, because I want to be able to see my cactus drawing a little bit easier, and also I'm not using this to make a mask, I will be using him perhaps also to transfer some of that pencil work onto the paper, but we'll see a little bit later. So the best thing to use for this is tracing paper. And you'll see more how useful that is as we go along. So as I transfer the sketch onto my tracing paper, I kind of neaten it up a little bit and make it a little bit more finished than that original sketch was. So sketch now done, and it's a case of putting some of these papers in place. So I'm really going to start on the wall first because I kind of want the wall to be in the background, so that's the most background part of this piece. So I'm just going to start there. Now a couple of handy tips when you're doing things like this. I tend not to go too small with my pieces, mainly because it just kind of takes a lot longer the smaller you go. But you know, you can if you want to. If you want to do really small pieces and make a really lovely little mosaic, then go for it. And another thing I quite like doing when I'm doing pieces like this is to use a couple of pieces that are matching. So I'll use paired pieces of paper and then throw in some that just are there as singles. You'll kind of see what I mean as we go along. And I make sure that when I'm using paired pattern papers, so two pieces from the same piece of pattern paper, I make sure that they're on opposite parts of the project so they can kind of like counterbalance each other and harmonise with each other as well. And for the single pieces, you can kind of put them anywhere you want. There's something really fun about doing collage and paper piecing and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what it is. Do you find that as well? So as I kind of get into the flow of doing this, what I'm just doing now is making sure that I've got enough pieces and they're around about the right size for what I want. So this random placement, there's a little bit of thought going in. So as I said, I'm putting the paired pieces so that they're opposite each other. I'm trying to change it up a bit so you've got big pieces and small pieces. And I don't want everything all in the same line. So there's, you know, a little bit of thought going on, but there's also some randomness as well. And you can tell I'm just putting them down. I'm not sticking them in place at the moment. So if you kind of do this and you get to a point where you're like, oh, I actually really like where all of these are placed, then don't forget to take a photograph of it so that when you do come to glue it down, you can match up where you had them and the placement that you had. But for this, I'm not particularly bothered. This is just to give me an idea of if I've got enough pieces to cover this background. And I do kind of start with not bothering to cover where I'd got the sketch. And at the time, my thought was that the cactus would go back there, so I didn't really need to cover it up. But as you'll see, when we get a bit later on through the process, I do go back and just cover the whole area, just to make it a little bit easier. And so that I don't have to worry about gaps of paper sneaking through. Now I do want a straight line for my table edge, so I'm just going to mark that up with a ruler just roughly to remind myself that that's where it's going to be. Now it doesn't matter too much for the background, but it's going to matter more when I come and put the table in. So usually I would use a regular gel or a matte medium for any of my collage stuff when I'm doing my mixed media projects, but for this I am just going to use an ordinary glue stick. It's kind of quick and handy. Now as I'm working on a surface that has got little bits of colour here and there, and I don't know how loose that colour is, I don't want to be picking it up, I'm just going to glue on a clean piece of paper, so just a bit of spare paper, and if I use that as my gluing station then I can make sure it stays clean, and when it gets too tacky and too sticky I can just swap it out for a new one. It's really easy to get dirty fingers very, very quickly when you're doing this kind of work, isn't it? So, and I want to make sure I don't, because otherwise I'll just have fingerprints all over the place. I can be a bit of a messy pup. And for this patchwork, you can see I'm not kind of jigsawing them together. I'm more sort of just layering them on top of each other, so they don't have to be perfect fits or anything like that. I quite like that sort of more chaotic look, but if you like the more jigsaw-y look, then go for that. So once the background is all stuck down, and you can kind of see what I mean now about having left that gap. But it's time now to do the table, and because the table's just in front of the wall, or you know, it's spaced in front of the wall, I want it so that the table edge will be just slightly overhanging those pieces of paper in the background. It would look a bit weird, wouldn't it, if I'd done the table first and then did the wall afterwards? That would just kind of look a bit weird. So it would look like it was more in the foreground. Well, at least that's what I hope anyway. And I want the table edge to be a straight line, so I'm just taking a little bit more extra care to make sure it is a straight line. And it's around about here whilst I'm doing the table that I realised that I kind of really need to fill in the gap of the background, and you'll see I'll be doing that as we go along. A little bit piecemeal to start with, but then a little later you'll just see I just cover the whole thing up. And this is where having that sketch on the tracing paper really comes into its own, because then I can just check the placement and see where it's going to go, which is really useful. Okay, so the background is done, and I do quite like the way the paper's overhanging the edges, but I'm actually going to square it all off and trim it all down, because I just think it will work better like that. Right, I think the background's looking quite cute, and it satisfies my urge for having lots of pattern paper together. I think that just looks quite nice. But it also occurs to me that I could use a little bit of found paper here, so I'm going to use a doily. Now, I'm kind of umming and ahhing about this doily at this stage, so trying that cactus sketch with and without the doily, and I come to the conclusion that I'm going to not commit as yet, and I will work up my cactus and then decide about the doily at the end. So I was going to stick the cactus directly onto the background and work on it there, but I think what I'll do is I'll work it up separately so that I can come back and try it with or without the doily and see how it goes. So to do that, I'm going to transfer my cactus drawing onto just a spare piece of paper, and that will become my platform so that I can paper piece my cactus together. So that's again how the tracing paper comes in really, really useful for this. So if I just go over my cactus line again on the back of the tracing paper, then I can turn it over so it's the right side up again and draw it again with the pencil, and that will transfer it onto the paper. Now I was going to do the same kind of patchwork, but it's around about here that my thoughts kind of change up on this. and I decided rather than using a patchwork of the different papers, I was actually going to just stick to a few papers. So to do this, the tracing paper again just comes in really handy, because now I can use it to draw out the shapes that I need on the back of my pattern paper, so I can cut them up and paper piece them properly. So the background's a random collage, whereas the cactus and its pot, that's going to be paper pieced collage. I think those two contrasts will work quite well, don't you? And it's a lot easier because then I don't have to cut up lots of tiny pieces. And it's really because of this piece of paper that kind of led me down this path. I thought it made a perfect cactus, because Tex, he kind of has little spikes on him, and the pattern on this paper kind of looks like little cactus spikes. But I don't want to cut out Tex as one big piece from this, because then everything, all the spikes and the pattern would kind of all go in the same direction, which I think would look a little bit strange. So I'm going to do each of the pieces of him so that they move in the direction that they're actually pointing in. I hope that kind of becomes clear when you see him in close-up. So the main body of him will be going in one direction, and that little bud of his, or that little cactus ear of his in the middle, that will be going in the same direction as his main body. But then the bud on the left and the bud on the right, well, I'm going to angle them just slightly differently so they look just a little bit more natural, I hope. So when it comes to gluing the pieces down onto my paper, I've still got that drawing as a guideline of where to place everything, so that's kind of handy. But I don't want the drawing to turn up on that final piece when I cut him out. So I'm making sure that I'm just putting glue into the centre of each piece of paper, sticking it down, and then when I come to cut it out, I can cut the piece of paper out slightly smaller than the pattern paper. So you can kind of see that I'm manoeuvring the scissors so that they just cut inside of that paper pieced border. If I'd glued him down completely, so the glue had gone to the edges, then I wouldn't have been able to do that, and I would have had to have just made sure that I'd trimmed him really well when I cut the paper off. Doing it this way is just kind of just a little bit quicker and a little bit easier, but it does require you to think about where you put the glue. And there, look, if I turn him around, then you can see what I mean. So I've managed to cut out the backing paper just a wee bit smaller than him. And I can put him on the doily and on the background and see if it's going to work. So this kind of gives me that little bit of leeway to decide whether to use it or not. And yep, I'm going to plump for the doily. I think it kind of works quite nicely. So I just want to put that last piece of the terracotta pot in place, but I want to have it so there's a little bit of dimension to it. So I'm just putting some glue into the corners of the pot and just making it so that I'm not pressing it down flat. And it's a tiniest bit of dimension, but it just adds a little bit extra, I think. Right, so Tex didn't have a flower, so a bit of artistic license. I am going to give this cactus a flower. I've cut out some of the pink papers into just rough petal shapes, and I'm just shaping them into a little flower. And again, I'm using just a paper base to stick all my petals onto. And I'm adding the glue stick on a little bit thicker here, so it's not going down thinly. I'm kind of using the petals to scrape a little lump of the glue, and that lump of glue is just on one little end of the petal, so I can stick that end down to the centre, and then the other end is free to shape into a more petally shape. Finish that off with a yellow centre circle. And now I can place my cactus flower onto my cactus and trim it if I need to trim it up and change it around a bit. The glue's still wet, so the petals are still moving around, so I'm just trying to be careful not to dislodge them all. You know, I'm just cleaning it up a little bit so that it looks just right and it's the right kind of size. So yay, I've used up some of my pattern paper and I've got a cute little picture. I hope you enjoyed watching the process. I'm exploring more ideas on how to use pattern paper and found paper over on my Patreon, so do come and join us. And if you're looking for some other mixed media inspiration, then here's some more videos to watch. So I shall see you all later. Thanks for joining me today and looking forward to our next arty catch up.